a tale as sweeping and complex as our vast planet, and as small as a sparkling sliver of southwest Florida coastline. A destination as far as the remote jungles of exotic lands, and as close as our own backyard. A challenge against seemingly unrelenting tides, and the courage of a community that stood up to make a difference. This is the story of the mangroves, nature's crown jewel of Pelican Bay.
In and out of rivers, streams of death in life, whose banks were rotting into mud, whose waters, thickened with slime, invaded the contorted mangroves that seemed to writhe at us in the extremity of an impotent despair. Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness.
Mangroves grow in estuaries where the fresh water and the salt water come together. And these estuaries, like the one we have here in Pelican Bay, supports a tremendous amount of seafood life. 85% of the seafood that we eat spends at least part of its life in a mangrove estuary.
From the outside, these rich swampy habitats appear dense, rugged, unbridled, impenetrable. More and more, however, scientists are beginning to discover how extremely fragile and essential these ecosystems really are.
That sun-drenched, shimmering, glorious expanse of land and water that is Florida. Our role is to protect it, to use it wisely and enjoy it, to ensure that those generations to follow may be as blessed as we. John Simons.
During the late 1950s, renowned landscape architect and planner John Ormsby Simons came to Florida, a burgeoning hub of construction and suburban development. He discovered a state that was, quote, going to pot in front of your eyes. Its ruined landscapes and fragile beauty became the impetus for a new kind of planning based on ecology and human needs.
Ever since the county had closed the inlet into what is now Vanderbilt Beach Boulevard, they had cut off a valuable water supply to Pelican Bay. In the 1950s, of course, the county thought, who's going to live way out there?
In the late 1970s, the Westinghouse Community Development Corporation announced plans to transform 2,100 acres of pristine southwest Florida coastline just north of Naples into a revolutionary mixed-use private community. They called it Pelican Bay.
As we give credit, Westinghouse must get a large part of it because they are the ones who, first of all, found someone who knew how to preserve all this.
John Simons was one of the people that we consulted with during this period of 1972 when we discovered the land until 1978 when we started work.
Incorporating luxury single and multifamily housing, hotels, shopping, a championship golf course, parks, beaches, and wetlands, the project was an innovative masterpiece of environmentally friendly design. Planned by Simons, his associate Charles Turner, and landscape architect J. Roland Lieber, the centerpiece of Pelican Bay was a 570-acre conservation area of mangrove forest, and a 3-mile tidal estuary along the Gulf of Mexico. In order to preserve the mangrove forest, they set the housing 2,000 feet back from the coastline and constructed elevated boardwalks over the conservation area to provide beach access for residents. The master plan of Pelican Bay was specifically engineered to preserve the vibrant and delicate ecology of the region while promoting the enjoyment of its natural resources.
We were cited by the Urban Land Institute as the model that other people ought to try and replicate. But the award that's most important is so many happy residents and people that work here. So we are very, very happy with Pelican Bay.
I don't believe it's a stretch of the imagination to say that what we see there among the mangroves is what Ponce de Leon saw when he arrived in 1513.
However, despite the meticulous efforts by planners and developers, by the mid-1990s, the once vibrant mangroves of Pelican Bay were at risk.
In my home live the happy animals, the crabs, the shellfish.
In my home, the flying fish like to jump.
In my home, birds love to rest in the trees.
In my home, man finds good things to eat.
In my home, all this little world lives happily.
I protect the lagoons against the mountains.
I protect the little ones against the big predators. I protect the people against the angry waves.
Then the children must help me against the wrongdoer
who pollutes me, poisons me,
contaminates me,
and destroys me.
That makes me very sick.
Then the children must help me to survive.
Be my messenger.
Teach them to love me, respect me, protect me.
I would love to be everybody's friend.
The Mangroves, written by the students of Le Flamboyant School in New Caledonia.
There are somewhere between 50 and 60 different species of mangroves in the world. Taxonomists are not always sure as to whether or not a particular tree is classified as a mangrove, but there are 3 characteristics that trees have that make them a mangrove. One, they're basically tropical in nature. They can't deal with sustained cold weather at all. 2, they're tolerant of salt. And the 3rd characteristic is that mangroves are viviparous reproducers. That means they don't drop a seed that needs to germinate, but rather the seed actually germinates on the plant, and when it's dropped off as an embryonic plant that's already growing. So if you've got those 3 characteristics, likes warm weather, tolerant of salt, and a viviparous reproducer, you've got a mangrove. The mangroves themselves also provide an important barrier to storm surges during hurricanes. You'll recall a few years back when we had that terrible tsunami in Asia. Areas where there were mangroves had practically no damage, but in those areas where they built up and had condominiums and motels and hotels right on the ocean front, they were totally destroyed.
While destruction and loss of life of that magnitude has never occurred along the Florida coast, scientists do credit Florida's nearly 500,000 acres of mangroves with absorbing tidal forces and reducing coastal erosion during the state's often turbulent hurricane season.
The primary protection of the land, property, and people are the wetlands that were left, but also we built a dam. That dam is called a berm now, and people walk on it and they bike on it, but the berm is really a dam that in concert with the wetlands to protect people.
If survival is an art, then mangroves are artists of the beautiful. Not only that they exist at all, smooth-barked, glossy-leaved, thickets of lapped mystery, but that they can and do exist as floating islands, as trees upright and loose, alive and homeless on the water. Annie Dillard, Sojourner.
Quite suddenly, there was a huge area, over 50 acres, that just started to brown and just die off.
Back in the mid-90s, when we had the large die-off up in the northern part of the system, there were some residents that became very concerned. I mean, we have a lot of condos that look over this area, recognized that there was a problem out there.
And the people in the Claridge, many of whom were my friends, looked at it all day long. They were just incensed because they couldn't get anybody interested in doing anything about it.
Clam Pass is affected by sand moving up and down the coast in response to wave action, which tends to push sand into the inlet. In the late 1990s, it simply wasn't working very well. It was clogged with sand more than it was open.
Immediately, the concerned citizens took their case to officials at Collier County.
But it didn't seem to help because the county would not entertain even a motion to do anything about it.
On November 7th, a typically hot and humid Florida day, scores of Pelican Bay residents packed inside the Commons building to formulate a plan of action.
So many people came that they were standing around the wall. I can see it now. And it was a hot day and everybody was short-tempered. And so there was a wonderful, wonderful woman. Her name was Claire de Silver. And she was the kind of a lady that did not let grass grow under her feet. And so she called a meeting and said, we've got to do something about this because it's spreading.
When we first moved down, we had little concern about the mangroves. There was no development to the north of Pelican Bay, and it was only really after the development of Bay Colony that high-rise people became aware of the mangrove die-off. And it was then that really I became a little bit concerned, and other people formed the Mangrove Action Group.
This organization listened to the concerns of community members and weighed both sides of the equation. Residents began to voice very valid concerns and objections. Was this Pelican Bay's responsibility to fix?
In the beginning, although some people were concerned, there were other people who did not feel that this was a major problem, that residents of Pelican Bay should get involved. After all, it was property that belonged to the county, and the county should do something about it.
Where was the support from the county?
The county had been appealed to, and one of the commissioners of the county commission said, well, we do own that land, but we have no responsibility to maintain it. We're not going to spend a penny of county money on it because it will only benefit Pelican Bay.
Who would be willing to commit their time and energy?
We had hundreds of members. In fact, the lady who was membership chairman complained she had too much work to do because we had members just calling up and saying, put me down. And
why not just let nature take its course?
Unfortunately, the county felt that this was nature and they could not interfere with nature. So there were two groups of thought within Pelican Bay. One is to do something, and some other group said, leave nature alone and it will heal itself. Unfortunately, that did not happen, and the die-off continued to grow.
They started digging around in the documents that started Pelican Bay, and Westinghouse had some responsibility, and they offered up to $1 million to preserve the mangroves because it looked as if it was going to take a lot of money to do something about it. And finally the county said, well, we won't spend any money on it, but if you want to assess yourself and look into it and pay for it, we'll allow you to do that.
I have never heard a complaint from a taxpayer in Pelican Bay about what it costs the taxpayers to do what is done here in Pelican Bay to preserve that beautiful part of our community.
Now, armed with a wealth of community insight and opinion, the committee began seeking governmental permits and soliciting scientific advice in order to develop an action plan that would not only halt the deterioration, but restore the estuary as a sustainable and thriving habitat.
We got some outside experts. We got a Mr. Snedeker, and we got a Dr. Karen McGee. She came all the way up from Belize in Central America to testify. She was about the best-known mangrove expert.
Over 2 years and $1 million later, the task force presented their comprehensive 10-year plan to restore the vitality and natural beauty of the mangrove and ensure its maintenance and preservation into the future.
From the highest heron down to the weightless mangrove island, with bright green leaves edged neatly with bird droppings, like illumination in silver, and down to the suggestively Gothic arches of the mangrove roots, and the beautiful pea-green back pasture, where occasionally a fish jumps, like a wildflower, and an ornamental spray of spray. It does look like heaven. Elizabeth Bishop, Seascape.
The mangroves are the nursery of the marine life in this area. The red mangroves have a lot of roots that come down and provide shelter for juvenile fish from predators. But the interesting thing about mangroves is they lose their leaves all year long. When you go in there, you see their little yellow leaves. This is nourishment for juvenile fish and shrimp and clams and all the other marine life in this area.
The branches of mangroves teem with birds nesting and perching, coastal and wading birds such as the brown pelican, roseate spoonbill, double-crested cormorant, and snowy egret, as well as majestic birds of prey such as the osprey and the bald eagle, turtles, alligators, snakes, snails, and spiders also find refuge in the dense, swampy groves of trees and shrubs.
The organisms that are at the bottom of the food chain originate in the shallow intertidal pools and around the mangrove roots, and the mangroves provide the nutrients that drive that system. And by maintaining the health of the system, it maintains its biological productivity.
It truly is a perfectly balanced ecosystem.
Trees floating on rivers are less amazing than trees floating on the poisonous sea. A tree cannot live in salt. Mangrove trees exude salt from their leaves. You can see it, even on the shoreline black mangroves, as a thin, white crust. Lick a leaf and your tongue curls and coils. Your mouth's a heap of salt. Annie Dillard, Sojourner.
When the Clam Pass mangrove at Pelican Bay began to die back in the mid-1990s, the newly assembled Community Action Group sought out experts in the fields of ecology, biology, and ocean engineering.
There was a committee that was formed with some of those people from the Mangrove Action Group, representatives from the Pelican Bay Services Division, our county commissioner was on that, some local environmental people, and actually I believe there was a consultant that came from the University of Miami, and all kind of brainstormed what direction to go, what was causing the problem, and what would be the course of action to try to remedy it and bring about restoration to the die-off area and to stop any additional die-offs.
They turned to Naples marine and environmental consulting firm Terrell Hall and Associates.
The permit had the goals established, but the actual implementation of those goals was actually a little bit of trial and error out here. There was a lot of experimental stuff done to see what would work and what wouldn't work. And given the fact that the whole mixture of the fact that we're dealing with a living system that doesn't necessarily respond to anything we do overnight, you know, you have to have patience to make sure that the stuff we were trying to do would work.
Throughout the restoration process, the concerned residents of Pelican Bay kept a vigilant eye on the progress of the Clam Pass management plan, frequently voicing their concerns and opinions to the Pelican Bay Services Division.
It was a real challenge to mix the need to experiment with some of this stuff and wait to see the results versus the need of some of the residents and the concerned citizens who wanted to see results immediately. So educating them was also a big part of the plan, and getting them to understand that the stuff we were doing was going to take a lot of time. And where we're standing right here is a perfect example of that, because this area was cattails from one end to the other. So we convinced the residents and the Services Division Board to allow us to basically take out all of the cattails. Well, when we did that, you can imagine it went from being a green cattail area to a mud flat. I mean, that's all there was mud. And the residents' reaction to that was very negative.
In the end, would the money, labor, and dedication of residents and the scientists reap rewards? Would the community of Pelican Bay ever see the Clam Pass mangrove thriving and full of life as it once had been? Only time would tell.
Acres of mangrove crowding the sea-streaked marsh. Acres of mangrove wading toward the beaches, and here and there a milky white bloom tossed on fragile boughs above the flooded reaches. Mangrove thrusts deep in salty mud, balances uneasily upon its three-pronged roots, huddled from the wind in its dissonance of leaves. Tempest and drought it has withstood, persisting bleakly for one end alone. Through an unheeded hour, briefly, awkwardly, to lift this frail, inconsequent flower. Muna Lee, Caribbean Marsh.
Today, the initial 10-year plan nearing full implementation, the visible transformation of the mangrove is remarkable.
Eventually, the die-off came to about 50 acres. And today, all those 50 acres are healthy and growing with mangroves, thanks to work which was performed in the mangroves by the Pelican Bay Services Division.
This is part of the die-off area right here to our right-hand side.
We're in the 10th year in terms of the restoration, and things are going very well. The majority of the die-off that had originally occurred back in the mid-90s is on the, we feel is on the road to recovery, and is looking much better than it did 10 years ago.
By the end of 2007, following 2 fortunate years of non-eventful hurricane seasons, the areas of the estuary that were impacted by the storms of 2004 and 2005 had begun to recover naturally. With all seemingly going well and the mangroves nearing full recovery, why then is it necessary to continue to invest in the mangroves?
The job is never done. It isn't like patching the roadway. It's an ongoing process that has to be monitored consistently and dealt with just as we have before. If one were to walk away from it and leave it, bad things would happen.
As you walk along the berm, you can see that a lot of those areas are coming back. The mangroves are reestablishing, and grasses are reestablishing. The fish, turtles, birds, and all are coming back in, and it's really looking very good. But on a small scale here is what we went through basically with the entire system and the mangrove die-off.
Back in the 90s, from 1995 to 1999, the inlet was dredged on an annual basis, and it closed several times in that period. We assisted the county with the permitting and the maintenance dredging to open the inlet. Since 1999, when the Clam Bay Restoration Management Plan was implemented, the inlet has only been dredged twice. And that's because the That plan opened up the waterways and improved the tidal flow through the inlet, improved the self-scouring capability of the inlet. So it doesn't need to be dredged as often now.
Going forward, a new 10-year plan is being considered for the maintenance of Clam Bay. Now more than ever, the Clam Pass mangrove stands as a flourishing symbol of pride and achievement for all the residents of Pelican Bay. Due to the uncommon efforts of the residents of Pelican Bay, along with the guidance of Pelican Bay Services Division and the expertise of Terrell Hall and Associates, it is possible to envision future generations living and playing alongside this pristine natural habitat, cherishing the abundance of beauty, wildlife, and natural resources native to the southwest Florida coast.
To me, the mangroves are the very heart of Pelican Bay, and the reason I say that is because they are so unique.
Nobody else had tried to do this, and what we did here might result in helping other people.
It's my hope that whatever plan we come up with will ensure that this mangrove preserve that we have here is protected as fully as it possibly can, because this is a wonderful, wonderful resource, and I'd hate to see anything bad happen to it.
This is an outstanding example of how man can live with nature. I think that is one of the principal messages of Pelican Bay, and we should be very proud of that.